Oh, Mrs. Kusi.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur le Président, et bienvenue, Monsieur le Ministre.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and welcome to the Minister for appearing. This is our committee. Thank you for appearing this committee this morning.
Found committing fraud against the government. Last time you were here in November, the number was 7. How many is that number at today, please?
Merci beaucoup pour la question.
Thank you very much for the question. I am happy that we can talk about the procurement system because this plays a key role for Canada, workers and businesses, and it's really key for government and Canadians. And for such a system, I'm waiting for the number from you. You are the minister, so in my view, you should be able to tell us how much. And yes, you're entitled to knowing the exact numbers and the up-to-date figures. Quickly, because I have many questions.
The respect we're supposed to afford other members of our House, including ministers, and so I would just remind Ms. Kusi
I appreciate that.
Yell.
Respect goes both ways. There was a very clear question. I think taxpayers and MPs deserve a very clear answer.
Point of order.
Continue. Go ahead.
It's more about the yelling at the minister than the question. Thank you.
I'm sure Mrs. Kusi will take that under advisement, but continue, Mrs. Kusi.
Yeah, it is a very clear question, Minister. How many cases of fraud, please? Tell Canadians. Just the number. Do you know the number?
Et si je comprends bien votre question, la réponse.
If I understand your question, yes, I already asked you in English and in French. What is the number, please? The answer is 7 cases, 3 that were announced last spring, 1 that added in July, and 3 others over the past weeks.
Comme vous le suggérez.
Civil servants, as you suggested, and as is important, are continuing to do their work on integrity. It's much easier now with the electronic procurement system and with information sharing. Thank you. And what's the value of these 7 contracts, these fraudulent contracts? What's the amount, the dollar amount? For the specific amount, Deputy Minister, do you have the number?
Would you?
Donc, on pourrait vous attendre.
Every effort that needs to be put into this is being put into this. Obviously, this is a politically independent process. We wouldn't want politicians, whoever they may be, to undermine the ability of the independent public service officers to do that job. So it's not a matter of how many I think there should be.
Okay,
it's
so
how
you've
many
said
the public
that
service...
you don't want to undermine public service officers doing their job. Then, in your opinion, please, Minister, do you believe all of the scandals, including the billions lost to CEBA, which we just found out about last week through the Auditor General, as well as the millions spent on ArriveCan, as well as McKinsey, that the procurement officials, then, you're saying, are the ones who Canadians are to blame for this large number, this millions of dollars, which I believe it's actually significantly more than that. But what, do you believe it's your officials to blame then, Minister?
You're asking whether we should be blaming officials for
I'm asking you what you think, why it's currently $4.5 million for 7 contracts. What do you think? Why do you think? And I think the number is way more than that, and we've seen these numbers increase consistently, whether we're talking contracts, fraud, the debt, the deficit. But in this case, the fraudulent contracts of 7, why do you think that's occurring, please?
So, as you're correctly suggesting, officials have the obligation to do whatever they can in an independent manner, not focus on politics and politicians, to do whatever they need to do to find out instances of fraud, and if there are such instances of fraud, to do whatever they need to do, including with the Rcmp and other law enforcing institutions, to collect and recollect the amount that would have been paid inappropriately.
Okay, thank you. You mentioned politicians. Minister, I just wanted your ideas as to what you believe your leader, the Prime Minister, is doing to the Finance Minister. We've seen 2 days of leaks in the Globe and Mail, and we know now that he has forced his radical spending on your Finance Minister, Minister Freeland, and that he has forced her to break the $40 billion deficit. And in fact, we just found out today, just today, that he is begging Mark Carney, Carbon Tax Carney, Conflict of Interest Carney, to serve as the next Finance Minister of Canada. So your Prime Minister, who actually is overseeing all of this procurement, all of this fraud under CEBA, under ArriveScan, I have some sympathy for you, that he is now going to oust the first female finance minister in Canadian history. Do you think that's right?
I apologize, Minister. That is our time, but
wishing you well in the upcoming Shuffle sweepstakes. You mentioned at the beginning a grading system, and I want to ask, if you were to give a letter grade to the effectiveness and integrity of the procurement system over the last 9 years, what letter grade would you give?
Well, thank you, MP Generous. We see each other in many circumstances over the last week. I appreciate the fact that you're asking good questions on procurement and implicitly recognizing that
I'll appreciate when you answer them.
Yes, I'm coming to that, obviously.
I doubt it. Go
so
ahead.
The fact that you're asking those questions about integrity also suggests that you value.
Sir, just give me a letter grade though. Like it's not a difficult question. I'll get to the difficult ones later. But how would you rate your performance, the performance of the government's procurement department over the last 9 years? Just give me a letter grade.
Well, in the last 9 years, I can speak obviously to the number of thousands of lives that were saved during COVID-19 because of vaccine.
I'll give you 10 seconds to give me a letter grade. Go ahead.
So yes, you can also speak about the national shipbuilding strategy, which is sustaining the jobs of about 20,000 workers every year.
Okay, time's up. Honestly, if I were the minister and I had your record, I would not want to give a letter grade either. Minister, if a third-party auditor flags that there's fraud on a particular procurement file and recommends that it be referred to the Rcmp, what should the government do in that case? Another fairly easy question, I think.
What it should do is that exactly what you're probably also thinking is that it should take those allegations very seriously and expect and demand that public service, independently of political interference, do the job that they need to do.
And what is that job? If an independent auditor says there's fraud, we think it should be referred to the Rcmp, the public service should then refer it to the Rcmp, right?
Yeah, well, the public service
should they?
is a big, not every.
Sir, we're still on the easy stuff. If a third-party auditor says that hypothetically a procurement file involving the Canadian Healthcare Agency involved fraud, and that third-party auditor says it in a meeting with multiple public servants from multiple departments, saying we think it involves fraud, we think it should be referred to the Rcmp. Should they take it seriously and refer it to the Rcmp, or should they take it seriously and try to bury it? What would you suggest?
Well, you spoke about hypothetical, and hypothetical cases are not truly useful cases to discuss in such general terms. I think you need to be more specific as to what exactly you have in mind.
Okay, I have in mind the case this committee heard about this week from Gary Hartle, who was an independent auditor who brought a room full of public servants evidence of Indigenous identity fraud on the government years ago, and recommended that the case be referred to the Rcmp. The government decided, in his words, they didn't want any trouble and decided to bury it instead of referring it to the Rcmp. Do you think that was a good idea or a bad idea?
Well, MP General, this is a great question, which I heard you ask.
And I look forward to a great answer.
Exactly just a few days ago to Minister Aidu, and she provided all the answers that you were correctly expecting of her, because it's in her file, it's her department. You know that because you asked her directly those same questions.
PSPC officials were in the room, sir. Your officials were in the room. I think at a basic level in terms of setting the tone, now would be a good time for you to advise your officials and the public that when they become aware of instances of fraud, they should refer that fraud to the RCMP. And you seem unwilling to say that.
Je peux le dire en français si en anglais ça fonctionne moins bien, mais
I can say it in French if it's not working into English. We had a meeting where you were present, Mr. Genois, with Minister Aidu, and you asked exactly the same question, and she provided you with the proper responses. So if you want to have a conversation with Ms. Ailu, you can do that. But you had that conversation a few months ago.
I welcome you. Neither. C'est une question très simple. Si c'est une
It's a really simple question. So if it's a case of fraud,
and since your officials were in the room, should they have given that information to the RCMP or buried it? And I wonder, frankly, how many other cases are there? But can you just clearly tell your officials and the public that instances of fraud, when officials become aware of them, should be referred to the RCMP? Yes or no?
j'ai déjà répondu à cette question à plusieurs reprises.
I've already addressed the question on several occasions, Mr. Alois, and Ms. Naidu addressed the question on several occasions as well. The same question a few days ago. I think maybe you just have to return and see what her response was, and it'll be easy to understand.
Can't even give a simple yes to a very simple question. That's
Thank you.
truly unbelievable.
Thank you, gentlemen. We'll go.